go. Hopefully what I can do. Okay. I think we're live.
Right. Well, hello.
This is Lowry Manders. Women
Oh,
change the world.
right, they do. That's right, they do.
My new favorite people. This is Mr. Andre Watson. And Mr. Watson is one of the favorite teachers at Berkner High School. Mr. Watson, what do you teach at Berkner?
So that's actually a part of my presentation, and so I'm gonna save that. I'm gonna save that, but then
I won't tell.
no.
So, you teach from your home right now.
That's right. That's right.
We're doing that, and Mr. Watson graciously agreed to help us with our Teens Against Racism, and so he's met once with those awesome teenagers online like this. And we'll meet again next Wednesday at 7. So if any of your high school teenagers missed out on that, please, we would love for them to join. It's such a great, it's going to be a great conversation. And last time they got to hear this same presentation, and I thought, oh my goodness, our grown-ups need to hear that. And actually, if your kiddos are at home, invite them. I mean, I think your sixth graders on up could, fifth graders even, can learn from this and give you guys a great family discussion. So I hope you'll grab your kids. Mr. Watson and I were just chatting. Is it okay if I call you Mr. Watson?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
We were chatting about big day today, and some of you guys have been watching this on Facebook a little bit. Um, I personally placed the Black Lives Matter sign at the memorial, the Say Your Name Memorial, which Dr. Stone graciously immediately gave our group permission to place at Lake Highlands High School. And the truth is, I think if you've been watching, you know this. She got so many complaints and thought the best way to preserve the presence of that memorial through the end of July, as she had committed to do, was for me to just remove that one sign. So I did that, and that is all on me. That I don't want Dr. Stone or the rest of the team to be blamed for that. I feel strongly that Black Lives Matter. And as Mr. Watson and I were talking, and Danita and I were talking today about, and we did a news story. We met there at this afternoon up there, and you can watch that on our website too, to talk about how, yes, we believe Black Lives Matter. We want everyone to come to this Facebook group wherever they are. We've been saying that. We want people to drive by that memorial and engage in it and consider opening their heart and mind. The new idea I want them to consider is that Black Lives Matter. We have to get there. If you, anyone in the community wants to go place a sign there, you may. It is an interactive memorial. So that's okay. There is a place for you to get paper and pens and write notes. And so many of you have been engaging with it in a positive way. I believe, and Mr. Watson, you can tell me what you think. I believe probably the negative feedback is from a very small minority of people in our community. And I feel like probably the majority of us stand with Black and Brown lives and understand that. Um, I'm hoping that more and more people will come to that. And for me, it's not a political statement, it is just a human rights statement. Do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, so the very first thing I want to say is, I speak for me, and when I speak for me, I speak for a young man that grew up in the community, a young man who, well, who's not very young anymore, but Thank you. Um, as a teacher in this community, and somebody who cares very much about this community, and because of that, you know, I know that there are some very strong emotions, and I know some people absolutely um, say that if you can't say Black Lives Matter, then we can't have this discussion start. Um, and there's merit to that. I'm not going to say that that is not the way to go, but I would also hope that people would understand where I'm coming from as well to say, I want to have the conversation, and that this conversation doesn't have a correct answer. We are going to have this conversation over and over and over again. And we're going to have new ideas. We're going to make sure, we're going to have to make sure that we're listened to and we're heard. And that eventually we all come to the same understanding that we should all be treated equally.
Mhm.
And that's not going to happen until Black Lives Matter.
Exactly.
So, you know, the fact that RISD is allowing for a memorial in the first place, you know, growing up in this community, that's a great start. That's a great start. And Dr. Stone has absolutely said Black Lives Matter. She's put that on her YouTube videos,
Okay.
the world to see. So I know that she is an ally,
Yes.
and I know that, you know, she's almost in an impossible situation in an unprecedented time where we haven't had a pandemic like this since what, 1920, 1912.
Mhm.
So, you know, there's a lot to unpack there. And so hopefully we can start with this conversation here to sort of explain, you know, why we have these visceral reactions in the first place to a seemingly simple statement that
Yeah.
has now become, fortunately.
Yeah. And I'll encourage people. I'll post again. One of the very first discussion we had on this page was with our friend Tracy Brown about those three words, Black Lives Matter, and what they mean. So I'll encourage you guys to go back to that. And I do hope it's something that teachers and students are not afraid to talk about, because students can handle so much and they're thinking about it. So I really hope they feel allowed to engage in that.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more there. And so with that, Lowry, is it okay if I go ahead and get started?
Please, you go.
Okay. All right. So the very first thing, guys, is I want to make sure, I think you've disabled screen sharing for me. So, you know, maybe I can start my stand-up routine now.
Now try. And
Yeah.
I did myself. So
There
you
we go. Perfect. And so the very first thing is I just want to see if the sound is going to work. So I'm just going to play Happy. So as long as you can hear it. It might seem crazy what I'm about to. Awesome. Cool. All right. Nobody's going to be upset about that song, Happy. We're starting from a good place. All right. So again, my name is Andre Watson. I'm a teacher at Berkner. And this presentation I'm going to have with my kids, hopefully, let me just say this. I would love to be in person with my children. That is my number one joy every day waking up. That being said, I don't even want to wade into those waters of what I personally think. I want everybody to be safe. I want everybody to be healthy. And if one of my children's family members or one of my children passed away, I don't know what I would do with myself. And so that's all I'm going to say about that. What our leaders decide, I'm going to try and support them 100%. So this presentation is the racial brain and how teachers and students reinforce implicit bias. I do want to make a couple of disclaimers. You know, first and foremost, racism is a very complex issue that comes from many different avenues. What I'm trying to do is explain it sort of from a biological and psychological sense, since that's where my specialty lies in the study that I have done. And that this is actually based on a book called Everyday Anti-Racism. It's for educators, but I think everybody could learn a lot from it. And so, you know, I'm not claiming to be an absolute expert on this, right? I do say that I'm a pretty good teacher, and I do spend a lot of time making sure that my research is based in the best available research that we have right now. I don't speak for my race. I don't speak for RISD, but I do speak for myself as an employee of RISD. And that's a small but really important distinction, right? Um, and most importantly, this doesn't take the place of talking to your friends who are people of color. You know, I am one person, and my experiences, though absolutely valid, do not represent everyone else's experiences. And so I absolutely say you need to go out there and you need to speak. You need to speak to your friends and engage in these conversations, because that's the only way we're going to change this, right? And so I'm going to skip over the norms, but with my kids, I would talk about these norms. And there's actually nine norms. One got cut off, but 9 norms that I go through. And to start this, I just want to challenge you. Why are there so many rules? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and try and read all of them to you, because it'll drag on. And unfortunately, I can't speak to you guys in person. But why do we have all these norms? And it's because we try and bury this conversation. And so in order to engage in this conversation thoughtfully and engage in this conversation authentically, we have to make sure that we all feel safe in order to share. Mistakes are going to be made. You're going to say something, I'm going to say something that's going to offend somebody. But we have to have that respect for each other to say, hey, I understand that you are trying your absolute best. And we have to come wanting to give our absolute best. But there is one rule I want to sort of read out to, right? And that's about anti-racism. Number 7, anti-racism involves learning from the diversity in the human experience and valuing equally the knowledge and actively shared within various groups. For example, being Black today can involve both experiencing stigmatization, particularly from whites, and enjoying a community that is bonded in the midst of oppression. And so hopefully, if you're paying attention, what was the difference in that racialized statement? Because it is a racialized statement, right? Race is not a biological construct, but it is something that is experienced. And hopefully your eyes came to the fact that I put air quotes around white, but I didn't put air quotes around Black. How does that reinforce the notion of white default? Does it? Have you ever put air quotes around things that you feel uncomfortable with? Mm-hmm. And so with that, these are the outcomes that I sort of want to come from by the end of this, right? Number 1, everyone, and I do mean everyone, has implicit bias as an adaptation to categorize and make sense of the world. All right, that's not a controversial statement. 2, that implicit bias leads to disparate outcomes in education and employment. We have data that supports this from the U.S. Census Bureau. One of the most damaging pieces of implicit bias occurs when we incorrectly believe that your race determines your intelligence, and you can and should correct bias when you identify it. And so hopefully by the end of this, we will have learned these and been given evidence to support these statements right here. And so, I missed a slide. Where is that? So, like I said, my name is Mr. Watson. And if you didn't already see it, right, this is a picture. This is one of my favorite pictures of me and a team that I coach at Berkner over here. And, the question becomes, what do you think I teach, right? Put the cart before the horse. If you saw right there, I teach AP and ESL biology. I'm the biology lead, a student council sponsor, and our version is called the Bell Guards, but Bell Boy sponsors, if you're from Lake Highlands, you should know what that is. And, when I was doing this with some of the kids, they were like, oh, history teacher, English teacher. Some of them knew that I was a biology teacher, but why did we label that? What about me made you think, oh, history teacher, coach, right? And so again, everyone has implicit bias as an adaptation to categorize and make sense of the world. And so I want you to put on your parent caps and pretend you're a teacher as well. Either one works, because we do this, especially as protectors of young people, right? That we care very much about. We definitely do this. And I want you to imagine you're walking into a group, a classroom, and you're looking at people for the very first time. And I want you to tell me who's going to be the most successful, just your visceral reaction. And I have some numbers labeled on there, all that. So the first one right here, which one of these numbers, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, let's see, move that right there. Which one of these students became the most successful in their field, probably of all time? Give you guys a second. Hopefully you guys said number 8, because number 8 is Stephen Hawking, right? One of the most renowned physicists who ever walked the planet, and mathematician as well, right? What about here? Visceral reaction, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which student went on to own a media empire and become one of the richest Americans according to Forbes? Hopefully you said number 4, because number 4 is Oprah Winfrey. What about here? Which student went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize? Hopefully you said number 1, because that is former President Barack Obama. What about here? Which student became one of the best basketball players of all time? Which number? And I know there's a lot here. Hopefully you said number 12, because that is in fact Michael Jordan. What about here? Which student became the most powerful person in their home country? Two, again, Barack Obama. And so what country was this taken in again? When I did this with the students were like, oh, it was taken in Hawaii as a country. And, you know, while that might just be a brain fart, let's think about, why was that the first thing that was said? Hawaii's been a part of the US for their entire lives, and most of our entire lives for the most part, depending on your age. Hawaii is absolutely a part of the US. So what about this picture, or what about this classroom made you think, oh, this isn't a part of the US? What about here? 1, 2, 3, or 4, which person in this picture became one of the foremost experts in the execution of foreign and domestic law? Hopefully you picked number 2, which is Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And then here, which student became a 2-time NBA All-Star? Hopefully you picked this gentleman right back here, because that is NBA superstar, or former superstar, Jeremy Lin. And so I don't know if you guys completed this, but there's an implicit bias training from Harvard. And if you just Google that, it goes that page. I would love for you guys to do that. It really is a good thing to do, to sort of see where your biases lie, not just when it comes to race, but also when it comes to cisgendered and heteronormative ideals, when it comes to what is normal. And I will use air quotes on that, because there should be. Everyone is normal. We are 99.9% the same, right? So everyone should be considered normal, and we do have biases, right? And so I then asked my students, and I ask you, you know, what do you think when people see you? Why do we dress the way that we do? Could I have chosen to wear a t-shirt? Absolutely. But what message would that have sent? Why should I think about that? Where do you have advantages? Where do you have disadvantages? It's not just for me. It's for everyone. Everyone has these advantages and disadvantages, these biases that people come from, right? And people put on you. And so the question then becomes, why do we have this? Now, I will say this. I want to put a trigger warning. If you're afraid of clowns, this does have a clown in it. So please look away if you're not comfortable with clowns, okay? But I think this does a great job of talking about sort of where this psychology from our brain comes from, of fear,
Fear is an emotion that seems to be almost universal, so it's experienced across a whole range of different cultures and even in other animals such as chimpanzees. It's basically the name we give to our interpretation of biological changes. So when we experience fear, it's as a result of perhaps our blood being diverted away from our digestive organs in order to flow towards parts of the body that will enable us to fight or to flee. And that's the sensation of having butterflies in your stomach. There are two main categories of fear. Some fears are innate, which means that we're born with these, and we all tend to share these same fears. And some of the common innate fears are a fear of death and a fear of snakes. And there's an obvious reason why we'd want to avoid these things. The second category of fears we call acquired fears, and these are things that we've learned, we've developed a phobia towards, even though there's no biological reason why we should be afraid of them. The acquired fear that's seen the biggest increase in recent years is called coulrophobia, and that's a fear of clowns. The highest grossing horror film of all time is It, which was released this year. And that's at least partly to blame, probably, for this massive increase in a fear of clowns. And the reason is because we've learned to associate something that was once quite harmless and something that you take your children to go and see for a joyous day out with a really quite threatening outcome. So Pennywise, the clown in It, eats children, which really links into our fear of dying. One of the reasons why fears can spread so rapidly through populations is because of something called emotional contagion. And that's basically this drive that humans seem to have as social animals to copy other people's behaviour and mimic their responses. And that's something we saw quite widely in the UK in 2016 in what's been called the clown apocalypse. So there was a spate of people who were dressing up as clowns, and it eventually led to people who didn't previously have a clown phobia ending up developing one just through watching other.
And so the things I want to take away from that is that there are two types of fears, right? Innate and sort of that acquired and learned fear, right? And those innate fears make a lot of sense. If we think about, way back when, who's going to survive? A person who's afraid of snakes or a person who's not afraid of snakes? The person who's afraid of snakes, because they're going to be able to survive and reproduce. And what are they going to do? More than likely, their children will have that innate fear of snakes and not go after that snake. And this sort of leads to us all sort of having similar basis of fear, right? Fear of the unknown. But then we have this acquired fear. And that acquired fear is built time after time. And not only can that acquired fear be built over time, but it also can be passed on to other people, learned. And so with that being said, how does that acquired fear impact us today? Well, hopefully you all have seen this video.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
And so before we sort of watch this again, I want to ask you, do you think she's afraid? Do you really believe that she's afraid?
Take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And I'm
me.
taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life. I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
And so what this video doesn't show, though, is her inflection, the fear that she has in that last part right before she puts her leash on her dog. And, I think we've all been in situations where we've been fearful and maybe looked back on it and realized there was no reason to be fearful. And so, and again, I speak for myself. I would propose that I actually think she is afraid. And there's an actual biological basis for what we're looking at right here, and it's called good continuation, right? Good continuation. And so can you change your implicit bias? Research shows that typically, unfortunately not, right? The things that we learn, the biases that we learn are kind of set in stone. That doesn't make them acceptable by any means. If anything, this shows us that if we really want to be anti-racist, we need to make sure that we practice being anti-racist, and that's hard. And so let me just show you why we biologically have this thing called good continuation.
Is that how you get dressed? Chances are you put your stuff on in the same order every day, and you might not even realize it. So, how many different ways can you get dressed using 8 items? A shirt, pants, underwear, 2 socks, 2 shoes, and a belt. Is it A, 4,380, B, 856, C, 64, or D, 1,680? Go ahead and think about it. Got your pick? The answer is D. Using these 8 pieces of clothing, there are 1,680 different orders that you can get dressed in. Is that what you guessed? Next question. Do you always sit in the same spot to watch TV? And sleep on the same side of the bed? Why is it likely that you're nodding yes right now? Whether it's how you drive, eat, shop, see friends and family, or do your work, your basic tendency is to repeat patterns over and over and over again. And in the case of a bad relationship or piling up credit card debt, sometimes the patterns can get you all tangled up. But patterns aren't all bad. In fact, the biological basis for patterns makes a lot of sense. Your brain had to process everything as a brand new experience. You would quickly become overwhelmed. Creating patterns is a survival mechanism that lets your brain save its energy for new information.
And so I want, as adults especially, all of us have started a new job before. How stressed are we at the beginning? We may not even be touching or scratching the surface of our job, but we are stressed out the first week. We're so tired after a new project's been given to us because this is brand new information. Now imagine if every single time we saw a new person, we processed them as an individual. You'd be exhausted. So our brain makes shortcuts. Our brains make shortcuts. And that's so that we don't have to be exhausted, right? And so I'm going to continue this right here.
Want to see what we mean? Check out this next game. Look carefully at the boxes and see if you can determine which red box is needed to complete the pattern on the top row. You have 10 seconds. Ready? Go. Did you figure it out? The answer is box number 4. But why? Well, if we highlight certain areas of the boxes, you can see that these are just letters of the alphabet. I, J, K, L, M, N. And the pattern is clearly just letters in a sequence. So the next letter in the sequence would be N, box number 4. Now that you see the pattern involved, try one more. Fill in the pattern
disclaimer,
now.
I didn't
You've only
get
got
this
5
one,
seconds. Ready?
Maybe
Go.
you're better than I.
It's box number 2. This time the letters are F, G, H, I, J. It's a little easier now that you know what to look for. And all it took was one time to plant that idea in your head. What you just experienced is your brain turning a one-time event into a pattern it can draw on in the future. In fact, many of the chemicals in your brain are designed to create more efficient neural pathways. Here to explain more is Corin Apicella of the University of Pennsylvania.
Every time you come across something new, your brain creates a pathway. And the next time you encounter a similar situation, your brain simply returns to that existing pathway. And eventually, this pathway becomes like the grooves in a well-worn rug.
The way your brain does this is by adding a protein called myelin. Myelin is added each time a pathway is used, helping your brain make faster and stronger neural connections. Your brain is so hardwired to make patterns, you might say patterns rule our world.
And so, okay, that's all well and good, but I've been raised my entire life to be colorblind. I've been raised my entire life to be anti-racist, right? I'm not racist. I don't have bias, but we already said we all have biases. In fact, there's a biological and psychological reason that supports this, right? And so one of the biggest things, right, is, what race are these emojis right here? And, when I asked the kids, they said the emoji race, and I love that. I absolutely believe that as well, because they didn't grow up watching this, The Simpsons, which, regardless of whether you watched it or not, you've seen some part of The Simpsons before. You know that white people are yellow, and black people, well, they're black or brown. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just be yellow too? And so this gives us this sort of default that white skin is what we should all be thinking about. So, okay, but why are you bringing this up? Well, what I'm trying to show you is that it's not just about what you've been taught. We are constantly being reinforced with good continuation all the time. If I play this for you guys.
C, whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G.
I don't have to continue that, because you all know the progression. Even if you're not necessarily musically inclined, you know what comes after. You could sing it back. You have myelin pathways that have been grooved in time after time. And we have this same phenomenon that happens, right? This happens in pop music all the time. This same thing happens in media all the time. Now, this is not to say that media is bad or what we're teaching children is necessarily bad, though I would, but to say that, we need to just get rid of everything. But what this shows is that by having this continuation after continuation of exposure to different stereotypes, it reinforces that bias. It reinforces that pathway to say, oh, if I see that person, that's what this person should be. And we look at these pictures of the character from Glee and we immediately know who does what. We know that this is a jock right here. How do you know that he's not just posing with basketball? We know that she's going to sing really powerful because that's the stereotype that we have with her, right? We know that this cheerleader is going to be dumb. What evidence do you have outside of your previous experiences to really judge the people that are before us right here? Nothing. But you know exactly what stereotype, what bias that they're trying to play at. And because of that, this is just showing how hard it is to actually be anti-racist, that it is a conscious effort, that you have to consistently flex your muscles. I enjoy Glee. Stereotypes and bias is how comedians make their jokes. I understand that. But what I'm saying is that we can't allow that to dictate the outcomes that we have for our students. And that's the problem. Implicit bias leads to disparate outcomes in education and employment, right? I'll skip this one right here. So if I look at standardized testing and achievement, we can see that the race gaps on LSAT as well as the race gaps in the SAT. And what we see here, and what a lot of times I hear as a teacher, is that, oh, well, Asian families care more about school. It's not about this, it's about the socioeconomic status. Well, even when we control for that, unfortunately, we still have these wide gaps. And I think that this gives us, unfortunately, this data bias. We have been so conditioned to believe that data can be used as the end-all be-all predictive tool, and it predicts pretty well. But why does it predict well? Because we've set up systems to make these outcomes. Remember, we get data after the fact. We don't get data before. So if we have a race gap in the LSAT and we have a race gap in the SAT, it's not because these students are inherently not as smart. It's because we've put systems in place that advantage other students. And that's the data we get. The fact that we have a repeating outcome year after year after year after all of these as an aggregate means that on average, we are producing really talented white and Asian students. We do a great job of that. That's the system we have in place. If we want these gaps to go away, it's on us to put systems in place that makes this more equitable so that it accurately looks like the world around us. Because we're 99.9% the same. And that's the way it is, right? College enrollment, and so obviously you take the test to try and get into college, and we look at these college enrollment rates and we look at the total percentage, right? If we just look at 2018, for instance, 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds are enrolled in college, right? Of the population of white individuals, 42% of white individuals are, 37% of Black individuals, 36% of Hispanic, and 59% Asian. And then let's not even talk about how we just completely forgot that groups of people existed, but I digress, right? I'm going to be honest, when I looked at this, when I was doing the research for this, I was actually pretty happy. The gap between white and Black students, white and Hispanic students, honestly isn't that large. That's awesome. But then we think about it, and we think about, okay, what is the single most influential university here in North Texas, North Dallas? If you said Texas A&M, you'd be absolutely correct, because a recent survey said that almost a third of all college graduates in North Texas, or North Dallas, excuse me, came from Texas A&M. Okay, so let's look at Texas A&M, and while we're at it, let's look at UT as well. Well, if we look over here, and we look at this enrollment numbers right here for fall, right? Fall 2019. We look at Asian numbers for male and female and total down here. We look at Black numbers, Hispanic numbers, internet. And then we go all the way over here to white. And if we do the math, if we look at, 2,300 Black students, and we look back over here, our Black and brown students aren't going to the same colleges that our white students are going to at the same rate. And while there are wonderful smaller universities, let's not be naive. As we know in business, it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And if you have the option, even if it's not necessarily a race bias, if you have the option between somebody who graduated from your alma mater or some random person from a different state, and everything else is equal, you're going to pick that person from your alma mater. And unfortunately, those large universities are looking very homogenous. That was A&M. Here's UT. Again, we're seeing an overrepresentation of our students. We look at careers after college. And again, we see that we're not getting the same representation when it comes to those positions. And that's just in schools, right? I'm one of the few, let's see, the 7.3% of Black teachers. Of those, I don't even want to get into how many are men. Names, voices, perceptions lead to different jobs and different promotions. Right? These links take us to different papers that give evidence to us. I will say that one of these papers actually shows that there has been less bias recently, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But we're still not seeing that in employment numbers. And then it takes us to this. What's intelligence? What does it mean to be intelligent? As a teacher, What does it mean to say, oh, you're naturally good at math? You're naturally good at science. You're naturally good at writing. What biases are we reinforcing when we say those things? And how does that commodify intelligence in a way that as adults, we know is not real? You know, personally, I made 2 Bs in college, right? Awesome. Ooh, yay. Okay, cool. Well, I know people making double my salary that barely passed college, right? It's fine. Is that intelligence, though? What does that mean? And I want us to really think about when we say these things, you're naturally good at something, how can we rephrase that in a way that really identifies that person as an individual instead of trying to lump them together in this bias that we're reinforcing all the time? Because it's harmful. It's very harmful to students. And we have the data to prove it, right? If I were to break this out by gender, you wouldn't even want to see that. Are we going to say that men are naturally better at math and science? I sure hope not. I sure hope not. Because that's a completely different subject, definite huge problem in our society. But I'd take a guess and say that less people would say that, right? And so why does this matter, right? Because one of the most damaging pieces of implicit bias occurs is we incorrectly believe that your race determines your intelligence. And that's through constant reinforcement of this bias that we see in media, that we see from other people, that we continuously try and reinforce. Sometimes unbeknownst to us, sometimes purposefully. All right. And so the last thing is we have to call out this behavior. And this is the hardest part because we have been conditioned, absolutely conditioned, to believe that these conversations aren't appropriate. We've been conditioned to believe that this conversation is political. You know, growing up in the South, which again is a different conversation, I was taught 3 things. You don't talk about money, you don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about politics in polite company. I recently went to a wedding in where, as part of their groomsmen entrance, they decided to put on MAGA hats. And while they may not have thought anything of it, it freaked me out. I cried myself going home, and I cried myself going to sleep. I went into a very dark place.
Mr. Watson, did you talk to them about that at some point?
So let's talk about that. No.
Yeah.
And the bias and the conditions that I have been relegated to time after time after time after time told me, just ignore it, swallow it, walk away from it. Because if I get angry, I get that bias of that angry black man. And this is all to say is that I don't know the best way to talk to someone about it, but I do know the way it feels to not talk about it, and I don't like it. I don't like being told by my coworkers that you're not black enough. And before someone is confused, those are from my white coworkers, not from my black coworkers, from my white coworkers, because apparently that needs to be said. It needs to be called out, however you feel most comfortable with. I personally have a conversation now with the people that talk about that. I'm very thankful to the people who have already started engaging in this. I had so many people reach out to me that I never would have thought would have reached out to me. And that means a lot. Even if you don't say necessarily the right thing, that means so much. Check in on the people that you care about. It may feel weird, it may feel awkward, but this is our everyday. This is absolutely our everyday. And unless we start talking about it in schools, and that's sort of the end of this conversation that I want y'all to take away, is demand it of your schools. Demand it of yourself. Practice those racial conversations. I know it's hard every day, but strive for it. If you want to ally yourself with the marginalized, you have to practice those uncomfortable conversations and work against that bias that we have grooved in ourselves to the point where I don't feel comfortable telling someone I feel uncomfortable.
Do you think those words you just said, just I feel uncomfortable, that seems like maybe a good place to start?
That's absolutely a great place to start.
Okay.
That's absolutely a great place to start. You know,
towards you or hearing something that's inappropriate.
I think that is a wonderful point, Larry. Hopefully we can then escalate that, right? To identify which part of that statement made you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the only way we do that is through practice, right? Going against the grain takes practice.
And how, as a teacher, now obviously your students can see that you're Black. So if they are a Black student feeling uncomfortable about something else that's going on, maybe they feel more compelled to come to you, and you can speak to that. But how can teachers who are white help students to know that they are a safe place to come and they can report these kind of things?
You know, I can only speak for me. It comes from relationship building, right? You'd be so surprised the things students will tell you. Well, maybe I don't have to tell parents. They definitely know when a child trusts you, right? When a child really trusts you, I'm sure, you know, maybe they told dad, but they didn't tell mom. Maybe they told mom, they didn't tell dad. Maybe they told the cousin, right? When they trust you, you can have that honest conversation. And so I would say that if you're not a person of color, right? If you are a white teacher, that by building those relationships, by asking yourself, why am I afraid of this conversation? And then telling the student that, hey, I'm afraid of this conversation, but I want to have it because I love you. I love you as a human being, and I want you to be great, right? That goes a really long way. And, you know, hopefully within our district, this movement will really take off and it becomes really a part of our curriculum.
Well, I agree. And that's why I'm so glad you did this again for grownups. I personally think it should be something that all the teachers and administrators see and just kind of starts the conversation about where is that implicit bias in my curriculum, in my interactions, in my arena. And it works for the rest of us too in our different careers and workplaces. But beyond that, I wish that the students would get this training.
Yeah. And so, you know, we are talking about it in our schools. We have already started those conversations within Richardson ISD. I don't want to take away anything from the fact that we have started. But again, as parents, I would love where the way you can be allies to students of color in Richardson ISD is to make sure that the training through Jeremy Pruitt, right? He's our leader of our equity and racial diversity team. If you would have him in small groups train us as opposed to in large school groups, because all of us go through these trainings to encounter bias and talk about this bias. But you all have all been in those trainings that have whole group. They're not effective. They're not real. And I think it starts to get really transformative when we start having those intimate conversations with people we trust. And then we can expand our circle. And it gets easier and easier the more comfortable we feel being anti-racist.
How do you think kids would receive this best? Also kind of in small group setting?
I think that we do technology training in our classrooms, right? Because at 1-to-1, thank you to all of us taxpayers doing that. So was definitely a great investment. These kids are very talented with technology, especially in our ISD. But I think that it becomes, every time I've had this conversation, I share my personal stories as appropriate with students as it comes up in the classroom every year, to the point where it's a pitch now, right? Which kind of detracts away from it, but it's important. And every year the students always say, Mr. Watson, and just walk away. They just nod their head and walk away. But they know. They absolutely know. And the kids are hungry, so hungry for real conversation, so hungry to interact with real information that impacts their lives. And in this time that we're in right now, this is a great time for all grade levels to start talking about race.
So, Andre, the MAGA hats, we might see them again this fall. And like you said, people are trained to feel uncomfortable talking about politics. And I have sensed as a parent who's super uncomfortable with our president and his role modeling for our children, I've seen the results in the school. I've seen children my son's age shouting racist epithets at Mexican students in our school. I've seen the damage that it does. I know it kills people. I know it hurts people. And so but I sense that the teachers are so afraid to engage in any conversation about it.
Yeah.
And so even to the point that when my daughter would raise it as a 5th grader, it would be shut down. So how are we going to have real conversations about what really matters if teachers aren't allowed to talk about politics?
So it's really interesting because I remember quite a bit of politics when I was going through the district. Full disclaimer, I graduated from J.J. Pierce. So, I've lived in the white supremacist system my entire life. I went to Baylor University after that. I've had questions about, why am I in this class? Why am I in Baylor? Am I just diversity, inclusion, my entire life? And I will say this, Larry, directly to your question, right? Politics, unfortunately, has become an everyday conversation. And until we are comfortable engaging in those intricacies, I'm not talking about taking sides. The students aren't dumb. They know your political beliefs, right? They know all that, right? But engaging why wearing a MAGA hat is different than shouting MAGA at somebody, right? I'm not saying that just having the hat on necessarily, that's our bias speaking, right? On what it means to us. That person may truly want Make America Great Again, but when you start saying MAGA at somebody, when you start saying build a wall at somebody, when you start saying go back to your country, that's inherently political speech. And we need to make sure that we address that in Richardson ISD, that type of speech is unacceptable, right?
It's hate speech.
That is. And because it comes out of the mouth of one of the most powerful people on the planet, it's labeled as just political, and so we can't really do anything about it. But as you just saw right there, as we experienced today, when we put Black Lives Matter on the, what happened? Not a political statement, but suddenly has become one. And so we really need to make sure that we train our teachers to engage in those conversations, to make sure, you know, a lot of times students do those things when they know that, hey, I can have this political belief. I don't have to throw it in this kid's face, right? I don't have to use this as a way to put somebody down. But a lot of times they're using this because they don't know any better, because they've never been told that it hurts other people's feelings, and they've never been taught that other people's feelings matter, which is crazy. Yeah. But, you know, that's unfortunately some of the realities for some of our kids.
So one of the things that hopefully we're going to do with the teenagers, and maybe this is something other teachers and parents watching can take too, is to talk about some kind of commitment or contract to go into school as an anti-racist student. And what would that mean? And so I'm also curious, what would that mean as a teacher? And I would really want to challenge RISD to think about that. What are those commitments you would make as a student and a teacher to say, these are the things we will not tolerate, and this is what I will do when I see it? Does anything stand out to you?
You know, right now, all I know is what we can do in our individual classrooms. Unfortunately, that's above my pay grade. I can promise you that I'm going to walk into those committees. I'm going to walk into those school board meetings, and I'm going to advocate for the things that we're talking about here, for the things that, you know, y'all's Facebook group has really strived for. But for me personally, right, it's, for me personally, because I do feel more comfortable about it, right? I don't use those contracts, but I think I will, because I actually really like that idea that we're going to strive to treat everyone with respect. We're going to strive to be anti-racist. We're going to strive to be, you know, an ally of marginalized groups, of all marginalized groups. And hopefully that's not provocative. Hopefully the things I've said here haven't been provocative. I know that they will be. But I do want people watching this who might be shaking their head at something that I've said. You know, I've spoken from my heart. I've spoken from the way that I feel. And, you know, thank you, Lowry. Thank you, moms of this area, for entrusting me, entrusting other teachers with your children. And I promise you that no matter where we come from, we're going to try and treat your children, with the utmost respect and love. And that's only going to be doubled down after what's happened this summer. So, Lowry, thank you so much for having me again.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Mr. Watson. And I want to remind everybody that if you've got a high school teenager, we're going to do another Zoom chat with Mr. Watson next Wednesday at 7, and just kind of chat and talk about microaggressions. And that's a chance for them to learn and also just learn from each other. And Mr. Watson, I just wanted to say, I am your ally, and you let us know whatever, and me personally know whatever I can do to support you. And I think you're great. I wish we had more teachers like you, and I trust that things are going to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much again, Lowry, and thanks to everybody who was out there. Just a disclaimer, little side note, I do want to make sure everybody knows I do have media release forms for those students of my team. It's okay.
Okay.
We're not, just FYI, right?
That's great. That's
So,
great, Mr. Watson. And you stay
absolutely.
safe, okay?
Yes, you too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.